What would you say to someone that says that ADHD is also in some ways a result of some early trauma?
Well, trauma is always fascinating to me. Trauma can trigger methylation. Trauma can interrupt the methylation cycle, right? But the idea in modern medicine that you have some kind of trauma, you have a disrupted relationship with your mother, for example, and that somehow we're going to go and put neuroplasticity altering chemicals into the brain, and it's going to fix this 30-year broken relationship you have with your mother. To me, it doesn't make any sense, right? And so it's not at all to poo-poo trauma, to put trauma down. But if you actually look at how we define these conditions, take depression, for example, we define depression, at least in America, we define depression as an inadequate supply of serotonin, right? So if you are low in serotonin, you're by definition depressed. So then you would think that the solution would be to raise serotonin, right? If we define depression as low serotonin, you'd think that the solution would be to raise serotonin, but that's not what we do. We take people that are depressed and we put them on SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And what these do is they ration what little serotonin these people have. So by definition, it never raises serotonin. So by definition, it never ends depression. I mean, I have clients come in to see me all the time and our clinical team, and then I'll say, well, how long have you been on antidepressants? And they say 15 years, 18 years. And my first question is, well, when did you think it was going to kick in? Right? So if we understand that serotonin is actually methylated in the gut, this process that I'm talking about is called methylation. We actually make serotonin from an amino acid called tryptophan, the one that's famous for making you sleepy after Thanksgiving dinner. I know you guys don't have Thanksgiving in the UK, but I'm from America. But so because we eat a lot of turkey on Thanksgiving, and turkey has a lot of tryptophan. So when you take tryptophan, methylate it into the neurotransmitter serotonin, of which 90% resides in your gut.
Methylate is basically processing.
Yeah, the processing. It's like the refining process. Crude oil gets refined into gasoline. Amino acids get methylated into neurotransmitters.
Okay.
And so this process of methylation, when it's broken, and it can be relatively easy to fix. When it's broken, it means that we have an impaired ability to create. We have an impaired ability to refine a raw material, and it leads to this deficit. Well, serotonin, for example, 90% of it resides in your gut. So if you don't have it here, you can't have it here. So depression rarely begins in the outside environment. It usually begins in the gut. Now, it may be trauma that led to the deficiency, but the fix is not in a chemical or synthetic or pharmaceutical blocking the brain's capacity to uptake these neurotransmitters. The fix is in restoring adequate levels to the body so it can naturopathically make its way back up the vagus nerve and arrive to the brain. Similar things are true with anxiety. I mean, if you actually have ever suffered from or know somebody who's suffered from anxiety, if you ask them 3 questions, you can find out very quickly that their anxiety is not coming from a cluster of symptoms. It's not coming from their outside environment. It is coming from within them. It's coming from their physiology, right? I mean, if you know someone who's suffered from anxiety and you say, well, have you had anxiety on and off throughout your lifetime? The most of the time they'll say yes. And then if you say, can you point to the specific trigger that causes it? Very often they'll say no. I mean, yes, I know some of my triggers, but I could be sitting in a podcast just like this in a very calm environment. There's no threats around, and all of a sudden I get overwhelmed by anxiety. I can be driving home from work on an otherwise innocuous day, and I can be overwhelmed by anxiety. Well, that is not coming from your outside environment, right? This is coming from a process called methylation, and it is caused from excess catecholamines entering the brain and an inability to downregulate these. So the body's entering this mild fight or flight response without the presence of a fear. See, remember that as sophisticated as we like to think our brains are, it's really not. Our brain is very primal. You know what the brain cares about? The brain cares about survival. And so it doesn't care how fat or skinny you are, how pretty or ugly you are. It doesn't care about your skin, your hair. It cares about survival. And so when we understand that the brain does not know the difference between perception and reality, we start to understand how it can play tricks on us. So now once we understand this, now we begin to understand how I can feel the presence of a fear, which is what anxiety is. It's a fear of something happening in the future. Usually is not going to happen, usually hasn't happened in the past, and is not likely to happen. But it's this fear starts to build up. You start to get very anxious. It can actually change your heart rate, or it can be mild enough that it just causes you anxiousness and mild anxiety. But there's no presence of a fear. And so you start trying to correlate it to your outside environment. It starts to drive you crazy because you go, well, I don't get it. I'm on vacation with my wife or my spouse and my kids, and I'm in the resort of a lifetime. I've been here 1,000 times. I love this place. There's no reason I should feel like this. But all of a sudden you have this feeling of anxiousness, anxiety. So these are lack of raw material in the human body. My mission is to try to help people by taking a genetic test once in their lifetime, find out where is methylation broken, and then stop supplementing just for the sake of supplementing and start supplementing for this deficiency so your body can thrive.
In the case of people that are listening to this now and they can pinpoint the moments where they've got an anxiety. So say I remember I had one guest on the podcast maybe 2 years ago, and after he became famous, he developed social anxiety. So whenever he would be around a lot of people, he'd feel that sense of anxiety. And then from that sort of catalytic moment, then when he's at home, he'd get the same rush of anxiety, but he would point to that catalytic moment of becoming famous. And then some things had happened in his life, and then he'd get anxiety at home when nothing was going on.
Right.
In that situation, what's the
so there you go. So now you've interrupted methylation, because there's one where there's the presence of fear, and there's one where there isn't. There's the absence of a fear. So to be very specific, true anxiety does exist, but you can point to the specific trigger that causes it. So for example, if you have a fear of heights and you walk to the edge of a 30th floor balcony and look over, you're going to feel anxiety. But if you're sitting at home and you start to become overwhelmed with anxiety, this is actually not coming from that trigger. This is coming from your physiology.
How would you treat that?
You look at the different, there are 5 major actionable genes that I like to look at, and they're what's called their suballeles. And when you find out what they're deficient in, you start to supplement with things like SAMe, S-adenosylmethionine, methylated forms of vitamins, L-methionine, the proper balance of B complex, methylated forms of folic acid or folate called methylfolate. And what happens is now the body has the capacity to degrade these neurotransmitters that are causing this fight or flight. This group of neurotransmitters called catecholamines, and the anxiousness that follows. And you'll find that the majority of people that suffer from idiopathic anxiety or generalized anxiety, because of low serotonin, they also have gut issues. You show me a person that's truly depressed, and I'll show you somebody that's also suffering from severe gut issues, either gas or bloating or diarrhea, constipation, irritability, cramping, because the same neurotransmitters that affect these emotional states also are responsible for the motility of the gut. And once you supplement for this deficiency and you return that activity to normal, you find that all of a sudden these strange allergies eviscerate, and all of this gas and bloating and diarrhea and constipation and irritability and all of this inability to equate things that I'm eating back to what is going on in my gut seem to go away. It's true with all kinds of conditions. You know, we have subscribed in this world to the fact that we are so affected by disease and pathology. And once I get you to subscribe to the fact that you have a disease, and can get you to subscribe to a lifetime of medication.